And good morning. We've been talking about divine thoughts. We've been talking about the deception that the enemy has out there that we can't control our thoughts, which is a lie that I bought into for a long time. I always thought that I couldn't stop a thought from coming into my mind. And then a year ago, this past October, God really drilled it into me with a lot of powerful scriptures that I don't have to have those same thoughts at all. And he'd given me an example this morning that I should have written down. I want to give you all an example. One of the examples that I have is, most of y'all know that I adopted a young lady 3 years ago. She's 15, Carrie Dawn. I think everybody that's on here is very aware of Carrie. But when she came to me, because of various things in her life, she believed that she was mentally retarded. And so I'll never forget the day when I looked at her and I said, "Well, Carrie, you think you're mentally retarded." Her eyes got great big, and she said, she actually didn't say anything. She just nodded her head yes to me. And it was a powerful moment when I looked at her and I said, "But you're not mentally retarded." And tears flowed. And that's a perfect example of a thought that got planted into her head that then grew and grew. And she thought on it and she meditated on it until she had the belief that she was, when the truth really is that she's not. And just from that moment forward of truth entering in instead of a lie, she no longer believes that about herself. And so now it no longer enters her mind. She doesn't go back and revisit and think that, well, that's how I am. That thought is just gone. Her mind has been renewed to where she no longer believes that anymore. And that's one of the examples that God gave me about how powerful it is that for us to understand that we don't have to have these bad thoughts. We don't have to be upset. We don't have to be discouraged. We don't have to be depressed. That's another lie. We don't have to be. We have power to fight against those things, and we have power to stop the thoughts from entering into our head to begin with. So Isaiah 26:3 is a scripture I'll refer back to a lot, and it's, "You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you." And the Hebrew word for mind is imagination. And God's really dealing with me and teaching me how our thoughts are so tied to our imagination. And he's really teaching me what imagination is. And imagination is simply those things that we hope for. I mean, faith actually starts with our imagination. Hope starts with our imagination. And hope is what our imagination can see that really isn't what is visibly able to see, what we're able to see with our eyes. So hope is our imagination seeing what isn't physically present at the time. And of course, Hebrews 11:1 is the definition of faith. About it and have that written down. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's what faith is. And hope is planted smack dab in the middle of that. Without hope, there is no faith. And without faith, there is no hope. It's the way that it works. And all of this is birthed in our imagination, which then becomes thoughts. And so we want to continue to sanctify our imagination, to only have the imagination given to us by God, and not feed those thoughts, not feed that part of the imagination that is not of God. And it's just powerful. I mean, it's just mind-boggling when we really start digging in and figuring out what all is going on in our mind. And the fact that mind is translated in the Hebrew as imagination, there's 9 different times in the Bible that the word that we read as mind is translated imagination. So as you're doing your daily Bible studies, once we get into that, it'll be interesting to see how often the word mind comes up into our remembrance, and then we remember that it's also imagination. So you keep him in perfect peace whose imagination is stayed on you. That's how we renew our mind. And once we have a renewed mind, then we no longer have those negative thoughts coming in. So Colossians 3:2 again, set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. We become what we think. Self-talk is one of the most important things in our life. Romans 8:25, I want to read that real quick. Now, I'm also going to tell you that if anybody on here has a concern for a child, this is a scripture that God gave me a long time ago that is a promise, I believe, for our children, but it also is very applicable to what we're talking about today. Romans 8:25 says, but if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. So it may not look like what we want it to look like, but because we have hope, because we have faith, because we trust God, then with patience we wait for it. And that's talking about how we use our mind, how we use our imagination, because it's in our mind where hope is birthed. But if we hope for that we see not, then do we wait with patience, wait for it. That's any promise that you've been given by God. You know that God has said such and such for your life, and you know your mission, you know your purpose, you know what you're supposed to be, and it hasn't quite yet transpired, but with patience we wait for it. With patience we wait for it. We become what we think. Take an inventory. Just at the end of the night, I challenge you over the next several days before we come back together again. As you lay your head on the pillow at night, you just do an inventory of your thoughts for the day. What did I spend most of my time today thinking about? Because we become what we think.
That's powerful. That's so true.
Self-talk is one of the most important things in our life. The thoughts drive our self-talk. The self-talk drives what we think, and it's an endless circle. It's a never-ending circle that just continues on. That what's coming out of our mouth is going back into our heads, going in through our ears. But as it comes out of our mouth, it goes back into our head, and it's just a vicious cycle. And then we become what we think. And yesterday I mentioned that you can never be greater than you think of yourself. You see yourself as greatness, and using that imagination, I'm finally getting this. I hope I can convey to you guys the excitement of what I think God's downloading in me. Because, 6 years ago, as I said yesterday, when Mary Beth and Stephen Curtis Chapman lost that little girl in such a tragic accident in their front yard, and I read her book, and I should have looked it up. I'll look it up and get the name of it. But I read her book about seeing as God sees. That's what God showed Mary Beth Chapman. Through that book, she was saying, that all through it, she's asking, why, God, why? It was a baby they had adopted from China. And she didn't understand why God would let them have that baby, only to have that baby then killed tragically, and certainly by their 16-year-old son, and what that did to him, that he was the one that ran over her. And as she was seeking God, he was more or less telling her that you don't see things the way I see things. And man, it spoke so powerfully to me that I want to see. I want to see. And I told you yesterday, I kind of use that as a physical thing, that I want to see the way he sees, but it's much, much more than that. I was externalizing a visual thing about seeing the way he sees. But when we make it spiritual, it's in our mind, it's in our imagination. And then all of a sudden, we start seeing ourselves as the perfect mother, We see ourselves as the perfect grandmother. We see ourselves as the perfect aunt or uncle, or we see ourselves as the perfect witness for Christ, or whatever it is. If we don't see ourselves, and if we don't take the time to meditate in God's way of meditating, not what the world would say about meditation, if we don't take the time to meditate on the things that he wants us to see, then it's going to be difficult for us to realize it. You can change your thoughts. And we have to be telling ourselves that over and over and over again. I don't have to live this way. Anything that's not of God has to go. Anything that's not of God has to go. That includes my thoughts. If I'm not having godly thoughts, then they can't stay inside of me, because I'm his. I am his. As he is in this world, so are we. And of course, then I'm going to talk about Acts 26:2. I cannot get away from that scripture. And the story, for those of you that haven't heard me say this, and others, I'm not the only one, because I got this thought from somebody else. In fact, Pastor Wade Markham at Cowboy Junction in Veneta, Oklahoma, many, many years ago, probably 10 years ago, was the first place I ever heard this scripture. And it's about Paul, who was in prison. And he was in prison underneath the city in a rock prison that they had dug into the rocks. And history will tell you that it was a manhole just the size of big enough just to lower a man down into it. And he didn't have sunlight. And then they say the sewer systems run through his cell. And he wrote an awful lot of the Old Testament, the New Testament, I'm sorry, while he was in prison. And so no baths, no showers, a meal once a day, the only sunlight. I mean, are y'all getting the picture? I mean, I can't even imagine the conditions. He didn't have a pillow at night. You know, Allie, if I don't have a pillow at night and it makes my head or neck kink, then the temptation is to wake up grumpy. Yeah. And he didn't have any of that. He didn't have a soft pillow. And so King Agrippa decided it was time for him to have an audience. And so before they would even take him to the king, they had to bring him up out of that dungeon, and they had to wash him and put him through a whole ceremony of getting him clean and to get the stench off of him before he could come. And so he stands before the king. And in Acts 26, verse 2, when King Agrippa says, "What do you have to say for yourself, Paul?" Paul looks at him and says, "I think myself happy, King Agrippa." And it's been a life-changing scripture for me. Yeah. King James Version will say, "I think myself happy, King Agrippa." And I thought, wow, he can think himself happy when he's been in prison for how many months for something he didn't do. It's not like he killed somebody and they put him in prison. It's not like he stole everybody's money and they put him in prison. I mean, the only thing he was guilty of is loving Jesus Christ, and he's in prison for that. And boy, I mean, all we got to do is somebody says something wrong to us. For crying out loud, all we have to do is somebody looks at us wrong.
Yes.
And we'll spend days thinking about that one little offense, that one little slight, or how many of us, and nobody raised their hands, but has changed churches because they didn't speak to me, or they didn't this, or they didn't that, or I mean, and then we think on it, and that's all we think about is they didn't, or they did, or did you see how they, or I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on, and it steals our happiness. It steals our joy. And then we're not even talking about real powerful offenses done against us, the real wrongs, when somebody really and truly has done us wrong. You know, our husband divorces us for no reason, or our wife cheats on us, or I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Or, you know, our kids aren't grateful, or the list goes on and on and on. And next thing you know, we've gone 2 weeks that if we've done that mental inventory at night that I talk about, okay, the last 2 weeks, what's dominated my thoughts? Well, my thoughts were about what he did to me, or my thoughts are about what she did to me, or what my neighbor said or didn't say to me. And then we see that that's what we meditate on. And what we meditate on is what we become. And here Paul is wrongfully imprisoned with an opportunity to speak for himself, and he just says, "I think myself happy." Man, nobody's going to tell me my thoughts aren't powerful. Our thoughts are powerful. And we can, with God's help, train our brain to think right. It's not even just training our brain. It's really a submission of our ability to think and turning over that ability to God, to the Spirit within us, that yes, I have the mind of Christ. It's not my mind, but it's your mind operating in my brain. And it's a submission. It's a giving up my will. It's giving up my rights. Because once we give in and we submit to that Spirit that lives within us, we don't have any rights. We lay down our rights. Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss. He lived with him. He ate with him. He drank with him. Jesus had put him in charge of all of his finances. Oh my, how many relationships have been wrecked over money.
Oh.
So many relationships have been wrecked over money. And Judas was in charge of all of the money that the ministry had, so to speak. Jesus put him in a position of trust. Jesus had him in his inner circle, and Jesus allowed him to betray him with a kiss.
Yeah.
And we just think if they just look at us wrong, or if they just don't respond the way we want them to respond, or I think myself happy. 2 John 1:2, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. That's what we're talking about. The truth is there. Truth is there. Everybody that's on this telecon, truth is there. All we're doing, though, is on purpose, intentionally allowing that truth to rise up and letting truth dominate our lives and not the lies, not the deception. Because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. That's a promise to stand on. Mm-hmm. And will be with us forever. I'm declaring that I'm not going to go through depressed thoughts ever again in my life. I've had that happen to me, and I'm not going to do that again, because truth abides in me, and it abides in me forever. It doesn't leave me. It never leaves me, because for truth to leave me means God leaves me. For positive thoughts to leave me means that God leaves me. That doesn't happen. The oneness that we have with Him is never to be separated. The two shall become one, never to be separated. Well, it appears that the two Sharons on our telecon today are single. They're both widows. That's not truth. In the physical, carnal sense of the word, they lost their husbands. But the true marriage is the fact that Sharon Cheryl belongs to God, and the two become one. And the truth of the matter is that Sharon man belongs to God, and the two shall become one. They're one with their Father. And when we lose our physical spouse, then what happens is God becomes our spouse. That God is the all in all of everything that we need, that we don't lack for anything. We don't want for nothing when we allow Him to really be who He wants to be to us, the oneness of Him. Jeremiah 29:11, one of my all-time favorites. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Boy, in the darkest of days, that kind of a scripture, that kind of a thought, meditating on promises like that, that truth lives in me forever, that the plan that He has for me is good and it's to prosper me, that if my mind is stayed on Him, I'll have perfect peace forever. That's what we meditate on, and that we can do 24 hours a day. And, it just hasn't been that long ago. I stayed all night with Terry and Melissa. It's been several years since I was in their home. Several years ago, when I was in their home, when they went to bed at night, they stuck in the CDs of the Word, and it plays all night long as they sleep. And they did that again. They've been doing this for years. Meditate on His Word. Meditate on it. And then once we meditate on it, that's who we become, because that's who we are. We can't help but become it, and when I get lax in reading the Word, when I get lax and still in myself, I was at a ladies' thing on Saturday. Allie was there, and it was kind of funny because one of the speakers started talking about how God talked to her in the bathroom. I can't begin to tell you how many times God
Right.
speaks to me in the bathroom. And if
Putting
it's
on our makeup.
yeah, putting on her makeup. If it's not in the bathroom putting on my makeup, it's in the car driving.
Yep.
I mean, and you know why? I mean, he showed me why. It's the two places I get still.
Right.
It's the two places I'm quiet. And it's like, oh, I want to be able to hear him all the time. I want to be able to have those thoughts rise up in me and transform my mind and renew my mind. And I want to be him all the time, not just when I'm in the
Putting on our
bathroom.
makeup.
The most vulnerable. I mean, oftentimes it's step right out of the shower or step into the shower and I can just immediately, it'll all start coming. And it's like I'm naked. I mean, that's not necessarily a pretty sight these days, girls. And yet,
Your
that's
naked days are over.
but you know what? He's not seeing that.
That's right.
He's not seeing that.
But he's seeing your most vulnerable, regardless. I mean,
That's
that's you're picturing it as being naked, and he's just.
That's exactly right. That's so good. Yes.
I have something I need to tell you, Elizabeth.
Okay.
One of my favorite scriptures, because I have anxiety, I don't like it. I'm living with it. But I have found in 1 Peter, verse 5-7, Peter was telling this crowd of people at the Galilean, by the Galilean, he was telling them, cast all your cares to God, your anxiety and cares to God, and he will take care of it through Jesus.
Man.
Yes.
And he will cast up. He will find peace for you. And and I find that it works. Every time I remember that scripture, it may not happen at that moment, but maybe 3 days later, and I thought, God is listening to me.
Yeah.
And that was interesting about these thoughts. And that was one of the favorite scripture of mine. Just thought I'd share it with you.
Well, thank you, Sharon. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
That's a good scripture. First Peter, that was 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your cares on him, for he cares for you. That's a great scripture, and it's just exactly what we're talking about. The way we talk to ourselves determines how our life turns out. You just got to be so careful. And when we say that, the way we talk to ourselves, I'm not necessarily talking about the spoken word, although I am talking about the spoken word. I'm also talking about the internal self-talk that we have. Of course I'm going to have this disease. Everybody else in my family has had this disease. Of course it's in my genetics that this is going to happen. Oh, my high blood pressure. Well, my mom's had it. My dad's had it. Whoa. That kind of self-talk is destructive. That kind of self-talk will kill our physical body instead of the scriptures that says that he wants us to live a long, full life. That he wants us well, that by his stripes we are healed, and the list goes on and on and on, which is truth. That's truth. Our self-talk will turn towards those things that, get about that time, I better get my cataracts checked, or I better get this, or I better, that's self-talk, even though we're not saying it out loud. When we're changing the thoughts in our mind, then we'll change our self-talk, because it starts with the thought. And we want to change our self-talk. Proverbs 18:21. I'll repeat that over and over again. Death and life are in the power of the tongue.
Yes.
And we want to really, really watch that. Deuteronomy 30:19. I always put those two together. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I set before you life and death, blessings and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live. I love those scriptures that gives us promises, not just for me, but for my kids and my kids' kids. They're all through the Bible, that he intends for us to have good things. So choose life and death, blessings or curses. So when that anxiety comes at you, you stop and take a moment and say, wait a minute, am I going to choose life or am I going to choose death? Am I going to choose blessing or am I going to choose curses? I choose life. I choose life. Well, how in those moments when we're being tempted with these thoughts of anxiety and worry, how do we battle that? We battle it with our words. We declare the scriptures. 1 Peter 5:7. If I cast all my care down because he cares for me. Jeremiah 29:11. No. I don't have to think this way because it's a good plan God has for my life. But more importantly, I don't want to stop with just the tool to combat the thought. I want us to dig deeper in this Bible study, that it is a renewing of our mind that the thoughts stop. I promise, I believe with all my heart, God doesn't intend for Sharon Cheryl to have anxiety attacks. I don't believe it for a second. And I know that through the renewing of your mind, that those are going to stop. And then eventually one of these days you'll wake up and you go, wow, it's been forever since I've had one. And those are the promises that we hang on. We control 100% the level of peace we live in. Wow. We control 100% the level of peace we live in. And it starts with our thoughts. It starts with our imagination. Again, you do that inventory tonight. What I talked about, that's your homework. Do your inventory. Send me text messages. We've got enough people that's coming into our Bible study that we don't have a lot of interaction, and that's okay, but we can still have interaction through the technology God's given us. Send me a text message. Let me know how your inventory was. Tonight, you lay your head on the pillow and you ask yourself, what's dominated my thoughts? If I have to give a percentage to my thoughts, what percent did God get today? What percent did our kids get? What percent did my job get? What percent did my neighbor get? Or anything else? Anything else? Yeah, your boss. Or the girls are teasing me, or I think they're teasing.
I'm being honest, but
What percent? Where are your thoughts going? Do your inventory. And then you'll see that changing as well. You'll see that changing as well. So anyway, thank you guys for joining us today. Boy, that 30 minutes goes fast. I'm going to unmute everybody. So that you're welcome to go, because I know some of y'all have, you guys have things you have to do, and places you have to be, and people to see. And
this.
I thank each one of y'all. Now remember, this is our last one for this week. We'll start next Tuesday again. Stop your video, sister.